The wind howled through Willow Creek's empty streets, kicking up dust that stung Sheriff Elias Kane's eyes as he stood over the body. Blood pooled beneath the man's cracked skull, a revolver glinting in the moonlight just out of reach. Elias's gut churned not because of the corpse, but because they were watching him again. Jamie Carter, that damn journalist, leaned against a lamppost, scribbling furiously in their notebook. Their denim jacket was too thin for the desert night, but they didn't shiver. At 28, Jamie had a fire in their eyes that made Elias, a decade older, feel like he was the one out of his depth. "You gonna write I'm hiding something before I even speak?" Elias growled, his voice low but carrying over the wind. Jamie's pen paused, and they looked up, their short, tousled hair catching the glow of the streetlight. "If you are, Sheriff, I'll find it," they said, their tone half challenge, half promise. Elias never wanted this badge. He'd taken it 2 years ago when his predecessor, Sheriff Hargrove, keeled over from a heart attack. Willow Creek, a speck of a town in Arizona, didn't give him a choice. Someone had to keep the peace. Elias, a former Marine with a knack for order, was the obvious pick. But peace was a fantasy when Jamie Carter rolled into town 6 months ago, chasing stories and stirring up secrets Elias had buried deep. Tonight's scene was no accident. The dead man, Tommy Ruiz, was a local mechanic with a rap sheet for petty theft. But a bullet in his chest and a bashed skull screamed something bigger, something Elias dreaded digging into. Jamie, though, was already circling like a vulture, their questions sharper than the knife they kept tucked in their boot. "Why's his gun out if he's the victim?" Jamie asked, stepping closer. Elias caught the faint scent of their cedarwood cologne, and his pulse quickened against his will. "You're not a detective, Carter," he snapped, turning to shield the body from their gaze. But Jamie didn't back off. They never did. The crime scene buzzed with deputies, their radios crackling as they cordoned off the alley. Elias knelt, examining the revolver. No prints. Wiped clean. Tommy's face was frozen in a grimace, his eyes wide with shock. Elias had seen death before, too much of it in Afghanistan, but this felt personal. Tommy had been at the Rusty Spur bar last night, mouthing off about knowing things that could shake this town. Elias had brushed it off as drunk talk. Now, he wasn't so sure. Jamie crouched beside him, ignoring his glare. "You knew him, didn't you?" they asked, their voice softer now, almost gentle. Elias's jaw tightened. He didn't want their pity, or their questions, or the way their presence made his chest ache with something he hadn't felt in years. "Knew him enough," he muttered. "He fixed my truck once." "Liar," Jamie said, but there was no malice in it. They stood, brushing dust off their jeans, and Elias caught a glimpse of the silver ring on their left hand, a gift from someone they never talked about. He wondered, not for the first time, who Jamie Carter really was beneath the bravado. As the coroner arrived, Elias sent Jamie away with a curt nod. "Go home, Carter. This ain't your story." But Jamie just smirked, tucking their notebook away. "It's always my story, Sheriff." They walked off, their boots crunching on gravel, leaving Elias with a corpse and a sinking feeling that this was only the beginning. By morning, Willow Creek was alive with whispers. Tommy's death was no secret, and neither was Jamie's front-page article in the Creek Chronicle, "Murder in Willow Creek. Sheriff Kane faces questions." Elias slammed the paper down in his office, his coffee going cold. The article didn't accuse him outright, but Jamie's words danced on the edge, hinting at cover-ups and incompetence. He wanted to hate them for it, but part of him admired their nerve. He found Jamie at the diner, nursing a black coffee and typing on their laptop. The place smelled of bacon and burnt toast, and the locals gave Elias wary glances. "You're gonna ruin me," he said, sliding into the booth across from them. Jamie didn't look up. I'm just doing my job, Sheriff. Someone's gotta ask the hard questions. And what's that make me? The bad guy? Elias leaned forward, his voice low. Jamie finally met his eyes. And for a moment, the world narrowed to just the two of them. No, they said quietly. But you're hiding something. And I'm going to find out what. Elias's heart pounded. He was hiding something bigger than Tommy's murder. Something he'd buried since he left the Marines. Jamie's relentless digging was getting too close. And not just to the truth. Every time they challenged him, every time their eyes locked with his, Elias felt the walls he'd built around himself crack a little more. He stood abruptly, tossing $1 on the table for the coffee he hadn't touched. Stay out of my way, Carter, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. As he walked out, he felt Jamie's gaze on his back. And he knew, damn it, he knew this reckless journalist was going to change everything. The diner's bell jingled as Elias stepped into the heat of the day, his boots heavy on the cracked sidewalk. Willow Creek's main street was quiet, but the air buzzed with unspoken accusations. Jamie's article had lit a fuse, and Elias could feel the town's eyes on him, waiting for him to slip. He drove his patrol truck to the station, where Deputy Clara Mendoza was waiting, her arms crossed. You read Carter's piece? She asked, her dark eyes sharp. Clara, 40 and tough as nails, had been Elias's rock since he took the badge. Hard to miss, he muttered, tossing his hat onto the desk. They're making me look like I'm sweeping this under the rug. Clara snorted. They're not wrong to question, Eli. Tommy wasn't just some drunk. He was tied to the Garza family. Elias froze. The Garza family ran a low-key smuggling operation across the border. Nothing big enough to draw federal attention, but enough to make trouble. Tommy had worked for them, fixing their trucks and maybe more. You think this was a hit? Elias asked, his voice low. Clara shrugged. Or he knew too much. Either way, Jamie's stirring the pot. You gotta shut them down before they get hurt. Elias's stomach twisted. He didn't want Jamie anywhere near the Garzas. But telling them to back off was like telling the wind to stop blowing. That afternoon, Elias tracked Jamie to the library, where they were hunched over microfiche, scrolling through old newspapers. The air smelled of dust and ink, and Jamie's focus was so intense Elias almost hated interrupting. You're digging into the Garzas, aren't you? He said, keeping his voice steady. Jamie didn't flinch, just glanced up with a half-smile. You're not as dumb as you look, Sheriff. Their tone was teasing, but their eyes were serious. Tommy mentioned the Garzas at the bar. Said they were moving something bigger than usual. I'm betting it wasn't car parts. Elias's jaw clenched. You're playing with fire, Carter. The Garzas don't mess around. Jamie leaned back, crossing their arms. And you're not. You're the one wearing a badge, acting like you've got this town under control. But you don't, do you? The words hit harder than Elias expected. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. I'm trying to keep people safe, including you. Jamie's expression softened, just for a second, and Elias caught a flicker of something fear. Maybe, or vulnerability. But then their walls went back up. I don't need saving, they said, standing to face him. They were shorter than Elias, but their presence filled the room. He wanted to argue, to tell them to leave town, to stop making his life so damn complicated. But standing this close, he could see the freckles across their nose, the way their lips parted slightly when they were about to fire back. His heart raced, and he hated himself for it. Tommy's autopsy came back. He said instead, stepping back. Bullet was from a .45, not his gun. Someone set this up to look like self-defense. Jamie's eyes lit up, and they grabbed their notebook. You're telling me this why? They asked. Suspicious. Because you'll find out anyway, Elias said, exasperated. And maybe if you know, you'll stop poking around where you shouldn't. Jamie grinned, and Elias realized he'd just thrown fuel on their fire. That night, Elias couldn't sleep. His small house on the edge of town felt too quiet, the shadows too deep. He kept thinking about Jamie, their defiance, their courage, the way they made him feel alive in a way he hadn't since he left the Marines. Back then, he'd been in love once, with a medic named Ryan. It had been brief, intense, and ended in blood when an IED took Ryan's life. Elias had locked that part of himself away, vowing never to let it out again. But Jamie was cracking that lock open, and it terrified him. The next morning, a tip came in. A witness had seen a black SUV near the alley the night Tommy died. Elias knew the Garzas favored SUVs. He headed to their compound on the outskirts of town, a sprawling ranch with more armed guards than cattle. As he pulled up, his radio crackled. Sheriff, you've got company, Clara's voice warned. Sure enough, Jamie's beat-up Jeep was parked 100 yards away, half hidden by a cactus grove. Elias cursed under his breath. They were already here, probably sneaking around with that damn notebook. He parked and slipped into the brush, finding Jamie crouched behind a boulder, camera in hand. What the hell are you doing? He hissed, grabbing their arm. Jamie yanked free, their eyes blazing. My job, Sheriff. You should try it sometime. Before he could retort, a gunshot cracked through the air, and the ground beside them exploded in a puff of dirt. Elias yanked Jamie down, their bodies pressed against the rocky ground as another shot rang out. His pulse thundered, not just from the danger, but from the heat of Jamie's shoulder against his chest. Stay down, he whispered, his hand still gripping their arm. Jamie's breath was ragged, but their eyes were wide with adrenaline, not fear. Who's shooting? They hissed, clutching their camera. Elias didn't answer, scanning the ridge above the Garza compound. A glint of metal caught his eye. A sniper. Maybe. Or one of the Garza's goons. He cursed himself for not bringing Clara as backup. Move, he ordered, pulling Jamie toward a ditch. They scrambled, dirt smearing Jamie's jacket as bullets kicked up dust behind them. Elias's training kicked in, his mind sharp despite the chaos. He shoved Jamie ahead, shielding them with his body until they reached cover. You okay? He asked, his voice rough. Jamie nodded, their face pale but determined. Who'd you piss off this time? Sheriff. They quipped, but their trembling hands betrayed them. Elias wanted to snap back, but the concern in his gut overrode his frustration. Stay here, he said, drawing his pistol. I'm going to check it out. Jamie grabbed his wrist, their touch electric. You're not going alone, they said, their voice fierce. I'm not some damsel. Elias stared into their eyes, caught between admiration and exasperation. Fine, he growled. But you do exactly what I say. They crept toward the compound, staying low. The shooting had stopped, but the silence was worse. It meant someone was waiting. Elias's mind raced. The Garzas were ruthless, but this felt too bold, even for them. Tommy's murder, the SUV. Now this ambush, someone was tying up loose ends, and Jamie was dangerously close to the knot. At the compound's fence, Elias spotted a gap just wide enough to slip through. He gestured for Jamie to follow, but they hesitated, their eyes scanning the horizon. What if this is a trap? They whispered. Elias didn't have an answer, but he couldn't leave them out here. Trust me, he said, the words feeling heavier than they should. Jamie nodded, and they moved together, silent and synchronized, Inside, the compound was eerily quiet. Rusted machinery and empty crates littered the yard, a far cry from the Garza's supposed ranching operation. Elias led the way to a warehouse, where dim light spilled from a cracked window. He peered inside, spotting two men arguing. One was Mateo Garza, the family's enforcer, his face twisted with rage. The other was a stranger, wiry and nervous, clutching a duffel bag. Jamie leaned in, their breath warm against Elias's ear. "That's not just drugs," they whispered, pointing to the bag. "Look at the shape guns. Maybe worse." Elias's stomach sank. If the Garzas were moving weapons, this was bigger than Willow Creek. Before he could respond, a twig snapped behind them. Elias spun, gun raised, but it was just a coyote darting into the brush. His heart pounded, and Jamie's hand brushed his, steadying him. "We need to get out of here," they said, their voice urgent. Elias nodded, but as they turned, headlights swept across the yard. A black SUV roared toward them, and Elias knew they'd been seen. "Run!" he shouted, grabbing Jamie's hand. They sprinted for the fence, the SUV's engine roaring behind them. Bullets pinged off metal as they dove through the gap, tumbling into the ditch. Elias shielded Jamie again, his body pressed over theirs as the vehicle screeched to a stop. "We know you're there, Sheriff." Mateo's voice boomed. "Walk away, or we'll bury you both." Elias's mind raced. He could take a stand, but with Jamie here, the risk was too high. "We're leaving," he shouted, keeping his voice steady. "No trouble." Mateo laughed, cold and sharp. "Tell your reporter friend to stop digging. Next time, we won't miss." The SUV peeled out, leaving dust and silence in its wake. Elias helped Jamie up, their eyes locking. "You heard him," Elias said, his voice tight. "Back off, Jamie." They shook their head, defiance flaring. "Not a chance. This is bigger than you think, Elias. And you know it." The use of his first name hit him like a punch. No one called him that anymore, not since Ryan. Back at the station, Elias tried to focus on the case, but Jamie's words echoed in his head. Clara was waiting, her face grim. "Found something," she said, sliding a file across his desk. It was Tommy's phone records, calls to a burner linked to the Garzas, and one to a number in Phoenix. "Feds might be interested," Clara said. "But if Jamie keeps poking, they're dead." Elias knew she was right. But as he looked out the window, seeing Jamie's Jeep pull up, he realized stopping them wasn't just about keeping them safe, it was about keeping his heart from breaking all over again. Jamie stormed into the station, their notebook clutched like a weapon. "You can't shut me out, Elias," they said, their voice sharp but trembling with something deeper, fear. Maybe. Or frustration. Elias stood behind his desk, his hands gripping the edge to keep them steady. "You almost got us killed," he said, his tone colder than he meant. "You think this is a game? The Garzas aren't just small-time crooks." Jamie's eyes narrowed, but they didn't back down. "And you're not just a sheriff playing hero. You're scared, Elias. Not of them, of me." The words cut deep, slicing through the armor Elias had worn since Ryan's death. He wanted to deny it, to tell Jamie they were wrong, but the truth was there in the way his heart raced when they stood this close. "You don't know me," he said, but his voice cracked, betraying him. Jamie stepped forward, closing the gap. "I know you're carrying something heavy. I see it in your eyes every time you look at me." Their voice softened, and for a moment, the station's hum of radios and ringing phones faded. "I'm not your enemy, Elias. Let me help." He wanted to. God, he wanted to let them in, to tell them about Ryan, about the guilt that kept him up at night. But letting Jamie closer meant risking everything: his control, his secrets, his heart. "You're not helping," he said instead, turning away. "You're making this worse." Jamie's face fell, but they didn't argue. They left the station, their shoulders slumped, and Elias felt like he'd just lost something he couldn't name. That night, he drove to the edge of town, where the desert stretched endless and empty. He sat on the hood of his truck, staring at the stars, trying to make sense of the chaos Jamie had brought into his life. He'd spent years building walls, convincing himself he didn't need anyone. But Jamie's courage, their relentless pursuit of truth, was tearing those walls down. The next day, Elias dug into the Phoenix number from Tommy's phone records. It traced to a warehouse owned by a shell company, classic Garza cover. He called in a favor with a contact at the DEA, who confirmed the Garzas were escalating, moving military-grade weapons across the border. Tommy had likely been a loose end, and Jamie was next if they didn't stop. Elias found Jamie at their apartment, a cramped studio above the hardware store. They were typing furiously, surrounded by stacks of papers and empty coffee cups. "You don't knock," Jamie said, not looking up. "You don't listen," Elias shot back, closing the door. "I got intel. The Garzas are moving guns. Big ones. You keep digging. They'll kill you." Jamie finally looked at him, their eyes searching his face. "Why do you care so much?" they asked, their voice barely above a whisper. Elias froze. He could have lied, could have said it was his job. But something in Jamie's gaze broke him. "Because I've lost someone before," he said, his voice raw. "And I can't lose you." The room went still. Jamie stood, crossing the small space to stand in front of him. Who was he? They asked, their intuition sharp as ever. Elias's throat tightened. He hadn't spoken Ryan's name in years. But with Jamie, it felt safe. "Ryan," he said finally. "A medic. We were together in Afghanistan. He didn't make it." Jamie's hand reached for his, their touch gentle but firm. "I'm not him, Elias. I'm not going anywhere." The words were a promise, and for the first time, Elias let himself believe them. But the moment shattered when Jamie's phone buzzed with a text. "Stop digging. Where you're next." No number, just a blank ID. Elias's blood ran cold. "They know where you live," he said, grabbing their arm. "You're staying with me until this is over." Jamie protested, but Elias wouldn't budge. He drove them to his house, a small place filled with ghosts of his past. As Jamie settled onto his couch, their presence felt both foreign and right. "You don't have to protect me," they said, but their eyes were softer now, vulnerable. "I know," Elias said, sitting beside them. "But I want to." For the first time, he didn't fight the pull between them. He let his hand rest near theirs, not touching but close enough to feel the warmth. As night fell, Elias lay awake, listening to Jamie's steady breathing in the next room. The Garzas were closing in, and he knew the truth would come at a cost. But with Jamie here, he felt something he hadn't in years: hope. Dawn broke over Willow Creek, painting the desert in hues of gold and pink. Elias stood at his kitchen counter, brewing coffee, while Jamie slept on the couch, their notebook clutched to their chest. He watched them for a moment, their face peaceful in sleep, and felt a pang of longing he couldn't shake. The phone rang, shattering the quiet. It was Clara, her voice tense. "We've got a problem, Eli. Someone torched Jamie's Jeep last night." Elias's grip tightened on the receiver. The Garzas were sending a message, and it wasn't subtle. He woke Jamie, breaking the news as gently as he could. Their face hardened, but their eyes betrayed a flicker of fear. "They're trying to scare me," Jamie said, standing to pace the small living room. It's not going to work. Elias grabbed their shoulders, forcing them to stop. This isn't just about you anymore, he said, his voice low and urgent. They know you're with me. That makes us both targets. Jamie's gaze softened, and for a moment, they leaned into his touch. Then we take them down together, they said, their voice steady despite the chaos. Elias wanted to argue, to lock Jamie away somewhere safe, but he knew they'd never agree. Instead, he called Clara for backup and devised a plan. The DEA contact had sent coordinates for the Phoenix warehouse, and Elias decided it was time to confront the Garzas head-on. But he needed Jamie's help. Their research had uncovered names and dates the DEA didn't have. They drove to Phoenix in Elias's truck, the desert blurring past as tension hung heavy between them. Jamie flipped through their notebook, reading aloud connections between the Garzas and a local politician, Councilman Vega. He's been taking bribes, Jamie said, their voice sharp with conviction. Tommy knew, and that's why they killed him. Elias's hands tightened on the wheel. Vega was a powerful man, and if Jamie was right, this went deeper than he'd feared. You got proof? He asked. Jamie nodded, pulling out a USB drive. Photos, documents, everything. I was going to publish it tomorrow. You're insane, Elias said, but there was admiration in his tone. Jamie grinned, and for a moment, the weight of the danger lifted. Takes one to know one, they teased, and Elias couldn't help but smile. The warehouse was a hulking structure on the edge of Phoenix, surrounded by chain-link fences and security cameras. Elias parked a safe distance away, scanning the area. We go in quiet, he said, checking his gun. Jamie nodded, tucking their knife into their boot. I'm ready, they said, and Elias believed them. They slipped through a gap in the fence, moving like shadows. Inside, the warehouse was a maze of crates and machinery, the air thick with the smell of oil and metal. Voices echoed from deeper within Mateo Garza and the wiry stranger from the compound. Elias signaled for Jamie to stay back, but they followed anyway, their camera ready. The men were inspecting a crate of rifles. Their conversation heated. Vega's getting nervous, the stranger said. He wants out. Mateo laughed, cold and cruel. No one gets out. Not him. Not the sheriff. Not that nosy reporter. Elias's blood ran cold. He glanced at Jamie, whose face was set with determination. They raised their camera, snapping silent photos, but the click was louder than either expected. Mateo's head snapped up, and before Elias could react, he shouted, "Intruders!" Chaos erupted. Elias fired a warning shot, scattering the men, and grabbed Jamie's hand, pulling them toward cover. Bullets flew, splintering crates as they dove behind a stack of boxes. Jamie's breath was hot against his neck. Their body pressed close. You okay? He whispered. They nodded, their eyes fierce. We've got this. Elias radioed Clara, who was waiting with DEA agents a mile out. Move in now, he said, his voice steady despite the gunfire. He turned to Jamie, his heart pounding. Stay with me, he said, and it was more than a command, it was a plea. As the DEA stormed the warehouse, Elias and Jamie fought their way out, dodging bullets and weaving through the chaos. They reached the truck just as sirens wailed in the distance. Jamie clutched the USB drive, their evidence safe. We did it, they said, breathless and triumphant. But Elias knew it wasn't over. Vega was still out there, and the Garzas wouldn't go down without a fight. As he drove back to Willow Creek, Jamie's hand rested on his arm, a quiet anchor in the storm. He didn't pull away. The drive back to Willow Creek was silent, save for the hum of the truck's engine and the occasional crackle of Elias's radio. Jamie sat close, their shoulder brushing his. The USB drive clutched in their lap like a lifeline. Elias kept his eyes on the road, but his mind was on Jamie, their courage, their stubbornness, the way they made him feel like he could be more than a broken ex-Marine turned reluctant sheriff. Back at the station, Clara was waiting with news. The DEA had arrested Mateo and his crew, but Councilman Vega was in the wind. Jamie's evidence was enough to tie Vega to the Garzas, but without him in custody, the case was shaky. He's got friends in high places, Clara warned. You two need to watch your backs. Jamie didn't hesitate. I'm publishing everything, they said, their voice firm. Elias groaned. You do that? You're painting a target on yourself. Jamie met his gaze, unflinching. If I don't, Vega wins. I'm not letting that happen. Elias wanted to argue, but he saw the fire in their eyes, the same fire that had drawn him to them from the start. Fine, he said. But you're not doing it alone. He called the Creek Chronicle editor, ensuring Jamie's article would run with police protection for the paper. That night, Elias and Jamie worked late at his house, drafting the article. Jamie's fingers flew across their laptop, their passion for the truth pouring into every word. Elias watched, mesmerized, as they wove together Tommy's murder, the Garzas operation, and Vega's corruption. You're good at this, he said, his voice soft. Jamie looked up, surprised. Was that a compliment? Sheriff. They teased, but their smile was warm. Elias felt the air shift, the space between them charged with something unspoken. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from their face, and Jamie didn't pull away. For a moment, time stopped. Elias's hand lingered, his thumb grazing their cheek. Jamie's eyes searched his, and he saw the same longing he felt, mirrored back. Elias, they whispered, and the sound of his name on their lips broke something inside him. He kissed them, tentative at first, then deeper as Jamie leaned into him, their hands tangling in his shirt. It was reckless, dangerous, but it felt right, like the first honest thing Elias had done in years. When they pulled back, breathless, Jamie smiled. Took you long enough, they said, and Elias laughed. The sound rusty but real. But the moment couldn't last. A brick crashed through the window, glass shattering across the floor. Elias shoved Jamie behind him, gun drawn, as a note tied to the brick fluttered to the ground. Leave town, or you're both dead. Elias's blood boiled. He called Clara, who arrived with deputies to secure the scene. Jamie, shaken but defiant, clutched their laptop. They're scared, they said. This means we're close. Elias wanted to believe them, but the threat felt too real, too personal. The next day, the Creek Chronicle ran Jamie's article, and Willow Creek erupted. Locals packed the diner, whispering about Vega's corruption and the Garzas downfall. Elias fielded calls from the DEA, who were closing in on Vega's last known location. But Jamie was restless, pacing the station. We need to find him, they said, before he disappears for good. Elias agreed, but he insisted on backup. They tracked Vega to a motel on the edge of town, a seedy place with flickering neon signs. As they approached, Elias's instincts screamed danger. He grabbed Jamie's hand, pulling them behind a dumpster just as a car pulled up. Vega stepped out, flanked by two armed men. He's not alone, Elias whispered, his grip tightening on his gun. Jamie's eyes were wide, but they nodded. Ready. Elias radioed Clara, who was en route with the DEA. But before help arrived, Vega spotted them, his face twisting with rage. You, he shouted, pointing at Jamie. You've ruined everything. A gunshot rang out, and Elias tackled Jamie to the ground, his body shielding theirs. The world narrowed to the sound of their breathing, the feel of their heart pounding against his. "I've got you," he whispered, and for the first time, he meant it not just for now, but for always. As the DEA swarmed the motel, Vega and his men surrendered, their fight over. Elias helped Jamie up, their hands still entwined. The danger was gone, but the connection between them was just beginning. Vega's arrest was the talk of Willow Creek, the diner buzzing with locals reading Jamie's article, their voices a mix of shock and pride. Elias sat in his office, the weight of the badge lighter for the first time in years. Jamie was at the Creek Chronicle, fielding calls from bigger papers wanting their story. They'd done it, exposed the truth, brought down a corrupt network, and survived. But Elias couldn't shake the memory of their kiss. The way Jamie's touch had ignited something he'd thought was long dead. He wanted to see them, to talk about what it meant. But fear held him back. What if this was just adrenaline? A fleeting moment born of danger. Clara noticed his distraction, her sharp eyes missing nothing. "You're in deep, Eli," she said, leaning against his desk. "That journalist got you twisted up." Elias didn't deny it. "They're trouble," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Clara smirked. "The best kind. Don't let fear stop you." He found Jamie that evening at the town's overlook, a cliff where the desert stretched endless below. They were sitting on a blanket, their notebook open, sketching the sunset. "Didn't peg you for an artist," Elias said, sitting beside them. Jamie smiled, their eyes soft. "There's a lot you don't know about me, Sheriff." They handed him the sketch, a rough but beautiful rendering of Willow Creek's Main Street, with Elias's silhouette in the foreground. "I drew this after I met you," they said. "You looked so alone." Elias's throat tightened. "I was," he admitted, "until you showed up." Jamie's hand found his, their fingers intertwining. "I'm not easy to deal with," they said, their voice quiet but honest. "I push. I dig. I don't stop. But I'm here, Elias. If you want me." He did. More than anything. But the words caught in his chest, tangled with memories of Ryan and the fear of losing someone again. "I'm not good at this," he said finally. "I've been running from this, from myself, for a long time." Jamie's gaze was steady. "You don't have to run anymore." They leaned in, their lips brushing his, and Elias let himself fall into the moment, the fear melting away. The next week was a blur of interviews and paperwork. The DEA took Vega into custody, and the Garza's operation crumbled. Jamie's article won national attention, and they were offered a job at a big city paper. Elias overheard them on the phone, debating whether to take it. His heart sank, but he knew he couldn't ask them to stay not when they were meant for bigger things. That night, Jamie came to his house, their expression unreadable. "I turned down the job," they said, standing in his doorway. Elias blinked, stunned. "Why?" "Because this is home," Jamie said, stepping closer. "Because you're here." They kissed him, fierce and certain, and Elias pulled them inside, the door closing behind them. But peace was fleeting. A new tip came: Ina Garza associate was still at large, and they'd mentioned Jamie by name. Elias's protective instincts roared back to life. He and Jamie worked together, tracking the associate to a bar outside town. It was a risky move, but Jamie insisted on coming, their courage unwavering. The bar was dim, filled with rough types who eyed Elias's badge with suspicion. The associate, a hulking man named Rico, was in the back, nursing a beer. Elias approached, keeping Jamie behind him. "We need to talk," Elias said, his voice calm but firm. Rico sneered. "You and your reporter friend think you're untouchable," Before Elias could respond, Rico lunged, a knife flashing. Jamie shoved Elias aside, taking a grazing cut to their arm. Elias tackled Rico, disarming him as Clara and deputies stormed in, alerted by Elias's radio. Jamie winced, clutching their arm, but their eyes were fierce. "Worth it," they said, managing a grin. Elias's heart pounded as he bandaged their wound, his hands shaking. "You're going to be the death of me," he muttered, but his voice was thick with relief. As they left the bar, Rico in cuffs, Jamie leaned against Elias, their strength and vulnerability a perfect balance. "We make a good team," they said. Elias nodded, his arm around them. "Yeah," he said. "We do." Months passed, and Willow Creek settled into a fragile calm. The Garzas were gone. Vega was behind bars, and Jamie's articles had put the town on the map for better or worse. Elias and Jamie were inseparable now, their bond forged in danger and deepened by quiet moments, late-night talks on Elias's porch, Jamie's laughter filling his once-empty house, their hands brushing as they worked side by side. But Elias still carried ghosts. Ryan's memory lingered, a reminder of what he'd lost and what he stood to lose again. Jamie sensed it, their intuition as sharp as ever. One evening, as they sat by a fire pit in Elias's backyard, Jamie took his hand. "You're still holding back," they said, their voice gentle but firm. "Talk to me." Elias stared into the flames, the words heavy in his chest. "I loved him," he said finally. "Ryan. He was everything. When he died, I swore I'd never let myself feel that again." He looked at Jamie, their face soft in the firelight. "Then you came along, and I couldn't stop it." Jamie's eyes glistened, but they smiled. "I'm not asking you to forget him," they said. "I'm just asking you to let me in." Elias pulled them close, his lips finding theirs, and for the first time, he felt whole, not healed, but on the way. The town, too, was healing. Jamie started a community column in the Creek Chronicle, giving voice to Willow Creek's marginalized people like them, like Elias, who'd hidden parts of themselves to survive. Elias attended a town hall where Jamie spoke, their words fierce and hopeful, urging acceptance and truth. He watched, proud and in awe, as the crowd applauded, some with tears in their eyes. But the past wasn't done with them. A letter arrived at the station. No return address. With a single line, "You didn't get us all." Elias's blood ran cold. He showed it to Jamie, who didn't flinch. "We've faced worse," they said, their hands squeezing his. Together, they traced the letter to a former Garza associate, a low-level runner who'd slipped the DEA's net. With Clara's help, they tracked him to a cabin in the desert. It was a quiet operation, no gunfire, no chaos. The man surrendered, confessing to sending the threat out of spite. It was over, but it reminded Elias how fragile their peace was. That night, Elias and Jamie stood on the overlook, the stars bright above them. "I never wanted to be sheriff," Elias said, his voice low. "But you make me want to be better. For you. For this town." Jamie smiled, their hand warm in his. "And you make me want to stay, Elias. Not just for the story, for us." They kissed, the desert wind wrapping around them. And Elias knew this was his truth now, a life with Jamie, built on courage and love. Willow Creek wasn't perfect. There were still whispers, still prejudices, but Elias and Jamie faced them together. They marched in the town's first Pride event, Jamie's hand in Elias's, their heads high. The badge felt lighter now, not a burden, but a purpose. And Jamie, with their notebook in their heart, was his partner in every way that mattered. As they walked back to Elias's truck, Jamie sketched in their notebook a new drawing, of two figures standing together under a desert sky. "This is our story," they said, showing it to him. Elias smiled, his heart full. "Yeah," he said, "and it's just getting started."